In the early hours, you're watching BBC Parliament on BBC Two.
Order. Statement. The Prime Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the G20 summit in China. But before I turn to the G20, I would like to say something about the process of Brexit. On the 23rd of June, the British people were asked to vote on whether we should stay in the EU or leave. The majority decided to leave. Our task now is to deliver the will of the British people and negotiate the best possible deal for our country. And I know many people are keen to see rapid progress and to understand what post-Brexit Britain will look like. We're getting on with that vital work, but we must also think through the issues in a sober and considered way. And as I've said, this is about getting the kind of deal that is ambitious and bold for Britain. It's not about the Norway model or the Swiss model or any other country's model. It's about developing our own British model. So we will not take decisions until we are ready, we will not reveal our hand prematurely, and we will not provide a running commentary on every twist and turn of the negotiation. And I say that because that is not the best way to conduct a strong and mature negotiation that will deliver the best deal for the people of this country. And as the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union told the House on Monday, what we will do is maximise and seize the opportunities that Brexit presents. And that's the approach I took to the G20 summit. This was the first time that the world's leading economies have come together since the UK's decision to leave the EU. And it demonstrated the leading role we continue to play in the world as a bold, ambitious and outward-looking nation. Building on our strength as a great trading nation, we were clear that we had to resist a retreat to protectionism, and we had conversations about how we could explore new bilateral trading arrangements with key partners around the world. We initiated important discussions on responding to rising anti-globalisation sentiment and ensuring that the world's economies work for everyone. And we continue to play our part in working with our allies to confront the global challenges of terrorism and migration. So let me take each in turn. Mr. Speaker, trading with partners all around the globe has been the foundation of our prosperity in the past, and it will underpin our prosperity in the future. So under my leadership, as we leave the EU, Britain will seek to become the global leader in free trade. At this summit, we secured widespread agreement across the G20 to resist a retreat to protectionism, including a specific agreement to extend the rollback of protectionist measures until at least the end of 2018. The G20 also committed to ratify by the end of this year the WTO agreement to reduce the costs and burdens of moving goods across borders, and it agreed to do more to encourage firms of all sizes, in particular SMEs and female-led firms, to take full advantage of global supply chains. Britain also continued to press for an ambitious EU trade agenda, including implementing the EU-Canada deal and forging agreements with Japan and America. And we will continue to make these arguments for as long as we are members of the EU. But as we leave the EU, we will also forge our own new trade deals. And I'm pleased to say that just as the UK is keen to seize the opportunities that leaving the EU presents, so too are many of our international partners who recognise the attractiveness of doing business with the UK. The leaders from India, Mexico, South Korea and Singapore said that they would welcome talks on removing the barriers to trade between our countries. The Australian Trade Minister visited the UK yesterday to take part in exploratory discussions on the shape of a UK-Australia trade deal. And in our bilateral at the end of the summit, President Xi also made clear that China would welcome discussions on a bilateral trade arrangement with the UK. Mr. Speaker, as we do more to advance free trade around the world, so we must also do more to ensure that working people really benefit from the opportunities it creates. Across the world today, many feel these opportunities do not seem to come to them. They feel a lack of control over their lives, they have a job but no job security, they have a home but worrying about paying the mortgage. They're just about managing, but life is hard. And it's not enough for governments to take a hands-off approach. So at this summit, I argued that we need to deliver an economy that works for everyone, with bold action at home and cooperation abroad. That's why in Britain we are developing a proper industrial strategy to improve productivity in every part of the country, so more people can share in our national prosperity through higher real wages and greater opportunities for young people. And to restore greater fairness, we will be consulting on new measures to tackle corporate irresponsibility. These will include cracking down on excessive corporate pay, poor corporate governance, short-termism and aggressive tax avoidance, and giving employees and customers representation on company boards. At the G20, this mission of ensuring the economy works for everyone was echoed by other leaders, and this is an agenda that Britain will continue to lead in the months and years ahead. Together, we agreed to continue efforts to fight corruption, building on the London summit, and do more to stop aggressive tax avoidance, including stopping companies avoiding tax by shifting profits from one jurisdiction to another. We also agreed to work together to address the causes of excess global production in heavy industries, including in the steel market. And we will establish a new forum to discuss issues such as subsidies that contribute to market distortions. Mr. Speaker, all of these steps are important if we are to retain support for free trade and the open economies, which are the bedrock of global growth. Turning to global security, Britain remains at the heart of the fight against Daesh, and at this summit we discussed the need for robust plans to manage the threat of foreign fighters dispersing from Syria, Iraq and Libya. We called for the proper enforcement of the UN sanctions regime to limit the financing of all terrorist organisations, and for more action to improve standards in aviation security, including through a UN Security Council resolution which the UK has been pursuing and which we hope will be adopted later this month. We also agreed the need to confront the ideology that underpins this terrorism. That means addressing both violent and non-violent extremism and working across borders to tackle radicalisation online. Turning to the migration crisis, Britain will continue to meet our promises to the poorest in the world, including through humanitarian efforts to support refugees, and we will make further commitments at President Obama's summit in New York later this month. But at the G20, I'm also argued that we cannot shy away from dealing with illegal migration, and I will be returning to this at the UN General Assembly. We need to improve the way we distinguish between refugees and economic migrants. This will enable our economies to benefit from controlled economic migration, and in doing so, we will be able to get more help to refugees who need it and retain popular support for doing so. This doesn't just protect our own people. By reducing the scope for the mass population movements we are seeing today, and at the same time investing to address the underlying drivers of mass migration at source, we can achieve better outcomes for the migrants themselves. As part of this new approach, we also need a much more concerted effort to address modern slavery. This sickening trade, often using the same criminal networks that facilitate illegal migration, is an affront to our humanity, and I want Britain leading a global effort to stamp it out. Mr. Speaker, when the British people voted to leave the European Union, they did not vote to leave Europe, to turn inwards, or to walk away from the G20 or any of our international partners around the world. That's never been the British way. We've always understood that our success as a sovereign nation is inextricably bound up in our trade and our cooperation with others. By building on existing partnerships, forging new relationships and shaping an ambitious global role, we will make a success of Brexit for Britain and for all our partners. And we will continue to strengthen the prosperity and security of all our citizens for generations to come. And I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I would like to thank the Prime Minister for her statement on the G20 summit and giving me an advance copy of it. I first went to China, Mr. Speaker, in 1998 to attend a United Nations conference on human rights. The same year, the European Convention on Human Rights was incorporated into UK law in our Human Rights Act. That legislation has protected the liberties of our people and held successive British governments to account, which is why, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we share the concerns of so many at the Prime Minister's government's plans to repeal the Human Rights Act. On the issues of Brexit and the G20, the Prime Minister said she wasn't going to reveal her hand on this subject. Nobody would blame her because she hasn't revealed her hand, or indeed any of the government's many hands on this particular thing. They're unclear of what they're trying to do. The G20 met in the wake of the vote to leave the European Union. We have to be clear, we accept the decision taken by the majority of our people. However, we cannot ignore the fact that the outcome has left this country divided, with increased levels of hate crimes, huge uncertainty about what comes next for our country, and an extraordinary lack of planning and preparation on how to navigate the post-referendum situation in relation to Europe. That uncertainty and division has been made worse by the government's ministers' political posturing and often very contradictory messages, which doesn't seem to add up to a considered position. Yesterday, the Brexit Secretary said that staying in the single market was improbable. The Prime Minister's spokesperson said that was not the case. It's one or the other. Can't be both. So can the Prime Minister tell the House what the government's policy actually is? The negotiations for Britain's withdrawal from the EU must focus on expanding trade, jobs and investment, defending social, employment and environmental protections, and as many colleagues have raised during Prime Minister's question time, the uncertainty facing universities, for example, the question that my friend, the member for Bristol West, raised is a very important one. They need certainty of their relationship with European universities immediately. It cannot wait. Parliament and the public cannot be sidelined in this from the greatest constitutional change this country has embarked on for 20 years. Mr. Speaker, globalisation is a key issue and has to be addressed, and I'm pleased that the G20 did address it, or apparently so. The G20 was formed in response to the global financial crisis of 2008, a devastating event that was triggered by reckless deregulation of the financial sector. It's a model of running the global economy that the Prime Minister acknowledges has produced huge increases in inequality and failed in its own terms. I raised this issue with President Obama during his visit earlier this year. It is clear that rising levels of inequality in all of our economies fuel insecurities and pit people and communities against each other. It's been 40 years since Britain has had to engage in bilateral trade negotiations. The free trade dogma the Prime Minister spoke of has often been pursued at the expense of the world's most fragile economies and has been realised with destructive consequences for our environment. We need a UK trade agenda that protects people and the environment, and I urge the Prime Minister to stand with me against the use of Britain's aid and trade policies to further the agenda of deregulation and privatisation in developing countries. We need a trade policy which values human rights and human dignity. In particular, could the Prime Minister inform the House about her talks with the Chinese President in two crucial areas, the first of which I raised with him in my meeting last autumn? The UK steel industry continues to face deeply challenging times. A key reason for this is the sale of cheap, subsidised Chinese steel that is flooding European markets. What assurances did President Xi give that this practice will stop, and stop now, because of the damage it's doing to the steel industry in this country and indeed in others? On the question of Hinkley, during the summer, the Prime Minister announced that she was postponing the decision on the new nuclear reactor at Hinkley Point. Firstly, could the Prime Minister take this opportunity to explain to the House why she decided to postpone the decision? Could she also set out to the House which aspects of the contract she is apparently re-examining? Finally, the Prime Minister was involved in discussions at the G20 around global challenges to security. As the complex, brutal conflicts continue across the Middle East, I agree we need a concerted global response to these challenges. The human cost of the refugee crisis, including the thousands drowning in the sea each year, must be our number one concern and our number one humanitarian response. That's why I remain concerned. At the heart of this government's security strategy also is apparently increased arms exports to the very part of the world that most immediately threatens the security. The British government continues to sell arms to Saudi Arabia, which are being used to commit crimes against humanity in Yemen, which has been clearly detailed by the UN and other independent agencies. Will the Prime Minister commit today to halting arms sales to Saudi Arabia that have been used to prosecute this war in Yemen with the humanitarian devastation that has resulted from that?
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the right honourable gentleman raised a number of issues there. First of all, may I just comment, he raised and referred to the question of hate crimes that have taken place in the United Kingdom. We have a proud history in the UK of welcoming people into this country, and there is no place in our society for hate crime. The government has already published a new action plan to take action against hate crime, and we are concerned about the levels of hate crime that we have seen. My right honourable friends, the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary, met Polish ministers earlier this week to discuss a particular concern about some attacks that have taken, terrible attacks that have taken place on some Polish people here in the UK. And we will be very clear, and the police are very clear, that they will act robustly in relation to hate crime, and anybody who has been the victim of this or who has allegations of hate crime taking place should take those allegations to the police. He talked about the issue of what we will be doing in our negotiations with the European Union. I did cover this in the statement that I made earlier, but just to reiterate this, what we will be doing as we negotiate our leaving from the European Union is negotiating a new relationship with the European Union. That will include control on the movement of people from the EU into the UK. I notice I don't think the right honourable gentleman referred to that. But also it will be about getting the right deal for the trade in goods and services that we want to see. But it will be a new relationship. And as I indicated in my statement, and indeed in Prime Minister's questions earlier, I will not be giving a running commentary, and the government will not be giving a running commentary on our negotiations. And there's a very good reason for doing that. We want to get the best deal, we want to get the right deal for the United Kingdom, and if we were to give a constant running commentary and give away our negotiating hand, then that would not be what we would achieve. But he referred to the issue of steel. I did raise the issue of overproduction in the plenary session. This was important because it wasn't just being raised with the Chinese government, it was being raised with all the leaders around that table. Crucially, the G20 have recognised the significance of this and recognised the issue of the steps that some governments are taking, which are leading to some of the problems that we see. That's why the new forum has been introduced, which will be looking at these issues, and the Chinese will be sitting on that forum. They will be part of those discussions. As regards Hinckley, I've said it before and I'll say it again. The way that I work is that I don't just take a decision without looking at the analysis. I'm looking at the details, looking at the analysis, and a decision will be taken later this month. On two other issues you mentioned, on Saudi Arabia, I met the Deputy Crown Prince at the G20. I did raise with him the concerns about the reports of what has happened in the Yemen. I insisted that these should be properly investigated. But the Leader of the Opposition said that in relation to the relations we have with Saudi Arabia, he referred to what happens in Saudi Arabia as being, I think he implied that it was a threat to the safety of people here in the UK. Actually, what matters is the strength of our relationship with Saudi Arabia on issues like dealing with terrorism, on counter-terrorism issues. It is that relationship that has helped to keep people on the streets of Britain safe. And finally, can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, I have a very clear view, as does the Conservative Party in this side of the House, that if we are going to see prosperity and growth in the economies around the world, the way to get there is through free trade. Free trade has underpinned the prosperity of this country. I will take no lessons from the right honourable gentleman on action to help developing countries and those who are in poverty elsewhere in the world, because this government has a fine record in terms of what we have done in humanitarian support, in educating girls and others around the world, and in helping people to have access to the medical care, to water, and to the resources that they need. But it is free trade that underpins our growth. We will be the global leader in free trade, and free trade is also can also be the best anti-poverty policy for those countries. I will be unashamedly will go out there and give the message that we want a free trade country, and I'm only sorry that the Labour Party is turning its back on something that has led to the prosperity of the United Kingdom.
Sir William Cash.
May I congratulate my right honourable friend on her emphatic support for free trade. In the European Union, we currently run a deficit with the other 27 member states, according to the Office of National Statistics, of 62 billion a year. However, we run a surplus with the same goods and services with the rest of the world of over 30 billion, which went up by about 10 billion last year alone. Will my right honourable friend therefore continue her crusade for free trade to develop our world opportunities through Brexit and to make sure that the European Commission and the European Union no longer continues to run our trade policy? We'll do it ourselves and do it really well.
Well, my honourable friend is right. We have an opportunity, and I want to ensure that we are ambitious in seizing those opportunities to develop those trade deals around the world. We will be developing that new relationship I've referred to with the European Union, which will be, obviously, part of which will be how we'll be trading with the EU in relation to goods and services, but we have the opportunity to develop those trading relationships around the rest of the world. Of course, we can't formally have those deals in place and operating until we leave the European Union, but we can do the preparation that makes sure that they are there when we need them.
Mr. Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much. And can I begin by thanking the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement? And in one area I do agree with her that, of course, the G20 summit was very much cast with the Brexit vote and her own Brexit brainstorming from the previous week. I read one report about it which said that what Brexit appeared to mean at the G20 was the Prime Minister getting shunted to the back of the row of the leaders' group photo, being briefed against by the Americans and the Japanese, and being left to big up the fact that Mexico, Australia and Singapore have expressed a vague interest in doing trade deals. Well, Conservatives on the other side don't like it, but this is how other people are viewing the United Kingdom internationally at the present time. Mr. Speaker, G20 leaders are as keen as us all to actually learn what on earth the UK government's plans are for leaving the European Union. Now, I asked the Prime Minister twice during Prime Minister's question, a really, really simple question, and since then she said, and I quote, that she's not giving a running commentary, which seems more like no commentary whatsoever, and that she's not going to comment on every twist and turn. What can I say to the Prime Minister? Being a full member of the European single market is not a twist, it is not a turn, it is absolutely fundamental to business across the United Kingdom. Does she seriously expect to be able to hold out for years in not confirming whether she actually wants the UK to remain a full member of the single market? Please, can she tell us now, does she want the UK to remain fully within the single market? Yes or no? It's not that difficult. On trade, Mr. Speaker, we know that the United States and pretty much every other country wants a trade deal with the European Union ahead of the United Kingdom, and a trade deal with the UK only after the UK leaves the European Union. So can the Prime Minister tell us how many trade negotiators the UK government has actually hired since the referendum? On immigration, Mr. Speaker, we learned that the promise of a points-based immigration system is being ditched. At the same time, the UK government apparently plans to trailblaze a policy first mooted by Donald Trump and build a wall. Is the Prime Minister not totally ashamed? Surely she can come up with something better than this. And on specific funding questions, may I ask her too? Voters were promised, if they voted leave, that the National Health Service would receive an extra £350 million a week if they voted to leave the European Union. Will the Prime Minister confirm that this promise, like the immigration promise made by the Leave campaign, is being broken? Mr. Speaker, a very important question that really matters to a lot of people in coastal communities in Scotland is about the funding that they were due to receive of more than €100 million from the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, sport between now and 2023. There has been no commitment whatsoever from the UK government to honour that funding round? Will she give it now?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, it has been very problematic in recent weeks to have to deal with a situation where the Prime Minister's party has suggested that EU citizens shouldn't participate fully in Scottish public life. We on these benches totally repudiate that narrow-minded, racist and xenophobic position. The Prime Minister is shaking her head. She should be aware of this. She should be aware of this. Will she take the opportunity to disassociate her party from this, apologise for it, and confirm that we value the contribution of European Union citizens living in this country and we are grateful for it? Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister...
Right, as the Right Honourable Gentleman has taken twice as much time as he was allocated, punctuated by some interruptions, it is true. I trust his last sentence will be a pithy one. Yes.
And the Prime Minister has not had time yet to make an oral statement to the House on the important matter of the estates review of the MOD. So will she confirm the commitment the government has given to communities that there will be consultation with them before final decisions and announcements are made?
It's an extremely important matter, but it's not obvious to me how it appertains to the G20. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will try and limit my response to the key issues that I referred to in my statement that the Right Honourable Gentleman picked up. First of all, can I just say on this issue of immigration, I mean, the Right Honourable Gentleman says that a points-based system has been rejected. What the people of the United Kingdom voted for on the 23rd of June as part of the vote to leave the European Union was to have control over people who are moving from the European Union into the United Kingdom. A points-based system does not give you that control. Correct. What a points-based system does is means that anybody who meets a certain set of criteria is automatically allowed to enter the country. It does not give the government the opportunity of the control and making the decisions as to who can enter the country. And it is that degree of control, that issue of control, that we will be looking for as we decide the relationship we're going to have with the European Union in future. Then he said a lot about trade deals with other countries, about the EU, about opportunities and so forth. Can I just make a very few points to him on this? What I saw at the G20 in my discussions with a number of other world leaders was a great willingness to seize the opportunities that come from the UK leaving the European Union to do exactly the sort of trade deals that my honourable friend, the member for Stone, has just been referring to. I think we should, as a United Kingdom, be willing to seize those opportunities. We should be ambitious in the deals that we wish to do around the world. As I said, we should be the global leader in free trade. We should be taking those opportunities and ensuring that as we leave the European Union, we are able to have the relationships that will ensure growth and prosperity for the whole of the United Kingdom, including growth and prosperity for Scotland.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the G20 with the Saudi Deputy Crown Prince, she will have met the Saudi Foreign Minister, Adel Jubeir, who is now in London. Is she as delighted as I am that he made clear to parliamentarians this morning that we can now add the GCC to the list of those parts of the world seeking an early free trade deal with the United Kingdom?
Very good.
Yes, I echo the comments of my honourable friend. I'm pleased that has been reiterated. It was an issue, in fact, that I discussed with the Deputy Crown Prince, and I'm pleased that the GCC are in that position too.
Mr. Tim Farron.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for her statement and for early sight of it. Now, Australia today has joined America at the G20 last week in slapping down her government, telling us we are in fact at the back of the queue for a trade deal. The plain fact is that this government is not concealing its hand. It hasn't got a hand, or it would appear a clue. So will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to reassure business and confirm that we will remain a member of the European single market? And will she agree with me that we trusted the British people with the question of our departure, so we should trust them with the question of our destination and put whatever deal she negotiates to the British people in a referendum?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman He refers to the remarks that have been made by the Australian Trade Minister. What the Australian Trade Minister has done is very simply to set out what the legal position is. And I mentioned it in response to an earlier point. And the legal position is this, that we are not able to finally sign or put into practice trade deals with other countries while we remain a member of the European Union. That is just the situation. It doesn't mean we can't prepare for that. It doesn't mean we can't be negotiating, discussing about that. But what I am also very clear about is that as long as we are full members of the European Union, until the point at which we leave, we will be advocates for free trade. We will be advocates for those trade deals that the European Union is negotiating with other countries. I gave that commitment to Prime Minister Trudeau in relation to the EU-Canada trade deal. I've given that commitment to President Obama in relation to the TTIP and the negotiation on TTIP. We will play our full part, but at the same time we will be looking to have those discussions which will enable us, when we leave the European Union, to have the trade deals that will give us the growth and prosperity that we want.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Prime Minister in the way that she quite rightly puts forward the huge benefits of free trade, but I know that she will be aware and share the concerns, notably the financial and automotive sector, about any consequences if we were to abandon our membership of the single market, which of course ensures that we can trade free of custom duties and with all the benefits that it confers. And while she's right to say that we don't want a running commentary on what now faces us, could I urge her to consider we do need some principles? And what assurances can she give us about custom duties and tariffs and our membership of that single market?
I say to my honourable friend, I absolutely recognise the important role that our automotive industry plays in the United Kingdom. I was very pleased a few days ago to visit Jaguar Land Rover in Solihull and to see the huge success that has been made of that company and the extra employment that they have brought, and as I say, the growth that continues in that company. As regards this issue of the sort of language that is used about membership of the single market, access to the single market and so forth, what I would say to my honourable friend is this. What I've said earlier, and I repeat again, is we want the right deal of for trade in goods and services for the United Kingdom. This is about saying, when we are outside the European Union, what is the right relationship for us to have with the European Union on trade? And that is why I think it's important for us not to simply think of this as trying to replicate something here or something there, but actually say, what is the deal that we want for the future? And that's the work that the Department for Exiting the European Union is doing at the moment, looking and particularly talking to different sectors, and the automotive industry will be one of those sectors, to ask what it is that they would be looking for, what they want to see, so that we can forge that deal and then go out there, be ambitious and get it.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 3 months ago, the International Syria Support Group agreed to back, as a last resort, airdrops to deliver much-needed humanitarian supplies to besieged areas of that country, including Aleppo. However, since then, the only thing that's arrived from the sky has been Russian missiles and Syrian barrel bombs, including, it is alleged yesterday, chlorine, a banned chemical weapon. Can the Prime Minister tell the House, based on her discussions about the situation in Syria at the G20, whether that commitment still holds, and if so, when she expects humanitarian relief to finally get through, by whatever means, to people who have suffered for so long?
Well, I think I can give the right honourable gentleman reassurance that that commitment is still there. The situation on the ground has, as he said, made it incredibly difficult for the delivery of that commitment. The issue of humanitarian aid getting into Aleppo was an issue that I raised directly with President Putin in my discussions with him. The right honourable gentleman has referred to concern about the sort of weaponry that is being used potentially by the Syrian regime. We have been very clear in our opposition, as he will know, to what is happening in relation to that. We're very concerned about the reports that have come forward. Obviously, it's important that those reports be properly looked at. But longer term, we remain committed to a political transition in Syria, and that political transition will be a political transition to a Syria without President Assad.
Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to hear the Prime Minister's full support for free trade being the underpinning of our prosperity here in Britain and across the world. I had thought until I listened to the Leader of the Opposition, that was widely shared on both sides of the House. Given that it isn't, and also the worrying noises we hear from both of the candidates in the US presidential election, both of which sound not terribly enthusiastic about free trade, can she make it a policy of her government to campaign both in the United Kingdom to argue for the merits of free trade and also on the global stage?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, he expressed his surprise. I think there was surprise on this side of the House when the Leader of the Opposition showed his hand that he wasn't in favour of free trade. Indeed, I suspect there are many honourable and right honourable members on the Labour Party benches who were surprised to hear that this is the policy of the Labour Party. We will be advocates and strong advocates for free trade, as my right honourable friend has suggested, and we will be ensuring that we take that message through. And as he says, it is free trade that underpins our prosperity.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like the member for Broxtowe, we all understand that this is an early stage of the negotiations, but it would be helpful to know more about what she values in the negotiations or what her aims are. She talked a lot about free trade, but is still resisting saying what she actually thinks of the ultimate expression of free trade in Europe, which is the single market. So please could she tell us and clear up the confusion from yesterday? Does she value membership of the single market? Does she think it should be an aim or an objective of the negotiations and that we should be trying to stay in it if we can?
I have to say to the right honourable lady, I have answered this question on a number of occasions already today. And she will find that she can, people ask me a question, I give an answer. If they ask the same question, I will get the same answer. So that's, I think that's perfectly reasonable and perfectly normal. What I say to the right honourable lady is the aim that we have is to get the right deal in trade and goods and services with the EU. But this will be a new relationship. We will be looking to develop a new model of the relationship between the UK and the European Union, and we will not, as I said earlier, be setting out every bit of our negotiating hand in advance of entering those negotiations, because that would be the best way to come out with the worst deal.
Alistair Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, not least what she said in relation to the international concern about some of the edges of the market economy that must be made to work for everyone. On global security, could I ask my right honourable friend to firmly back and support the attempts being made today in London by the Syrian coalition to bring forward their own proposals to settle the matter? And could she urge the respective powers that have an interest and competing interests in Syria that the longer they go on fighting over the bodies of the people of Syria, the more the risk to global security will continue, and that this opportunity being presented in London is one that should certainly be taken?
I absolutely agree with the comments that my right honourable friend has made. This is an important point today with the Syrian opposition coming together and the meeting that is taking place here. And I also agree with him that as we look at global security, actually what we want to see, what the best thing for global security is to see an end to the conflict that is taking place in Syria. I continue to believe that as the conflict continues in Syria and the actions of the Syrian regime under President Assad, it is that we saw encouraging people actually to join terrorist organisations, to go out there and to fight and potentially to return to other countries and to conduct those terrorist attacks. And we must see and must ensure that we are playing our part, as I believe the UK is today, in hosting the Syrian opposition in these talks, in ensuring we can bring an end to that conflict.
Sir Nigel Dodds.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for her statement, and can I commend her for her common sense realism in terms of her approach to negotiating our exit from the European Union? And isn't it very clear that a lot of the criticisms and commentary that's coming from those who advocated the Remain side, perfectly legitimate point of view, but demonstrates a lack of respect for the decision that the British people as a whole have now made. It is time to get on with making the best of that in the way that she's proposing to do. And I certainly offer her our support in these benches, in our party, and the support of the First Minister of Northern Ireland to try to achieve the best possible deal for all of the United Kingdom and for Northern Ireland in particular. On terrorism, can I ask her simply this? Can she ensure that more action is done to bring about greater deterrence for those who go around preaching hatred and radicalisation of young people in the United Kingdom. More needs to be done to send strong sentences out, to ensure that strong sentences are passed that will act as a deterrent in future.
Well, can I thank the right honourable gentleman for the support that he's giving to the government in the approach that is taking. As he says, I think it is the sensible way to go forward in relation to these negotiations. I want to ensure that the interests of Northern Ireland are fully taken into account in the work that we do, and that was the message I gave when I visited Northern Ireland shortly after I became Prime Minister, and in fact the message I've given to all the devolved administrations, that we want that full engagement so we can ensure that the interests of the whole of the United Kingdom are taken into account. On the issue of terrorism that he has mentioned, it is important that we deal with those who preach hatred. I mean, obviously, we have seen the sentence yesterday for Anjem Chowdhury and another individual. This whole question of the radicalisation of young people particularly, but radicalisation of people generally, be it online or in other ways, is an important one that we need to address. I want to see good, as he said, sentences that actually give a very clear message that this is not acceptable activity for people to be involved in. But also we need to do the work that we're doing, for example, on through the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit, the work that we're doing within Europe on this, and the work that we're doing to actually promote mainstream voices against the preachers of hate.
Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From her discussions with other world leaders at the G20, will my right honourable friend ensure that small and medium-sized businesses are at the heart of future trade negotiations, including the many successful local businesses that will be attending my jobs fair in Louth on Friday?
Well, can I commend my honourable friend for holding her jobs fair on Friday. I'm sure there will be many opportunities given by local businesses there, and many people who will be able to take those opportunities up and will benefit from that jobs fair. Small and medium-sized enterprises will play an important role. Earlier in the summer, I had a meeting at number 10 Downing Street with a number of small and medium-sized businesses and those representing SMEs, and what struck me was their optimism about the opportunities that are now available to the United Kingdom and their willingness to play their part in taking up those opportunities and encouraging the prosperity we want to see for everyone in our country.
Ben Bradshaw.
Does she accept that Britain, like all developed economies with ageing populations, needs to import labour to thrive? And therefore, would it not be an act of extreme self-harm for us to give up our full and unfettered access to the single market out of a dogmatic and arbitrary desire to reduce immigration?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, it isn't an arbitrary and dogmatic desire to reduce immigration. We recognise the impact that uncontrolled immigration can have on people, particularly those at the lower income lower end of the income scale, and also I think the right honourable gentleman needs to consider carefully the message that the British people gave in the vote on the 23rd of June. And I think that vote did tell us that they wanted to see the government able to take control of people moving from the European Union into the United Kingdom, and that is what we will do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you come to my constituency and drive along the A45, you'll see the Ruston Lakes retail development going up, and there are huge steel constructions going there, and the Leader of the Opposition will be pleased to know that it's 100% British steel that's being used there. And does not coming out of the EU give us an opportunity, if necessary, to deal with Chinese dumping of steel? But could I ask the Prime Minister in particular whether she would find time next year to come and see Rushton Lakes? And in particular, sir, they have some very good shoe shops.
I think my honourable friend may just have sealed the deal, Mr. Speaker, at the end there. Can I commend and welcome the fact that Rushton Lakes Development is using 100% UK steel? I think that's very good. I think we need to look at this issue of overcapacity and overproduction, not just as an individual country or indeed as the EU, but actually globally, which is why it's so important that this was on the agenda for the G20 and that this new forum has been set up with Chinese representation on it.
Caroline Flint.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe in enterprise and wealth creation, but I also believe in fair taxes as well. And the IMF and the OECD have both said that actually if the amount of tax that was owing to for developing countries was actually paid, it would far dwarf that amount of support they get through international aid. Could I ask the Prime Minister, given her statements on tax avoidance, and given that we now have public country-by-country reporting enshrined in law, how she will make that a priority for the G20?
Well, I was able to refer in my interventions at the G20 to this important issue about tax avoidance and the work that needs to be taken. I think the G20 has been playing a leading role, actually, in addressing this issue and in galvanising action in relation to this issue. There are a number of initiatives that have taken place, both in relation to, as I said, the whole question of those people who are able to try to use different jurisdictions to resist the payment of the tax that is due. That action is being taken. I was able to refer to the necessity of pushing forward on that particular initiative. But there are other things too, like providing support to developing countries for them to be able to collect tax within those countries that is needed and that is should be being collected. And initiatives like the Addis Tax Initiative are also important. So we've played a leading role in the G20 on this, and the G20 is now playing an important global role.
Maggie Throop.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend for taking the opportunity of the G20 summit to raise the issue of modern slavery? Can the Prime Minister outline what further steps can be taken to engage with countries around the world to eradicate this evil practice?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising the question of modern slavery. I think it is hugely important. It's a heinous crime. We do need to be doing more about it. I've been encouraging people in other countries to look at the initiative we've taken and the legislation we've taken, which of course our Modern Slavery Act is the first of its kind. But there's also more that we can do between law enforcement agencies working together and other government agencies working together to ensure that we stamp out the terrible organised crime groups that are actually behind this terrible crime of modern slavery. In doing that, though, we must never forget that it takes place here in the UK, with UK individuals being taken into slavery too. So we mustn't just think it's a global issue. We need to act global, we also need to act locally.
Alex Salmond.
Why did the Prime Minister authorise a very public dressing down of the Brexit Secretary merely for telling the House that membership of the single market and free movement of people tend to go together? Isn't it possible that the Brexit Secretary, who's believed in this stuff for years, has thought more deeply about it than the Prime Minister, who's been a Brexiteer for a matter of weeks? And can we revert in this House to the traditional practice where ministers are disciplined for misleading the House, as opposed to the odd occasion where they're caught telling the truth?
Well, first of all, I don't recognise the picture that the Right Honourable Gentleman has set out. The Secretary of State was very clearly setting out that this was not a zero-sum game. As I've said in response to other questions on this, the government is absolutely clear that we're going to go out there and get the right deal for the United Kingdom and are negotiating a new relationship with the EU.
Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't it vital in this Brexit period that we maintain confidence? But isn't it the case that actually, with the opportunity to forge new global trade deals, with record low interest rates, and with the opportunity to free ourselves from burdensome regulation, now isn't a golden time to invest in the United Kingdom? And will she use forums such as the G20 to continue to make this case?
Well, I thank my honourable friend. I'm very happy to do so. I was doing that in Hangzhou at the G20 summit. But it is also the case that I think we must welcome the vote of confidence that's been given in the United Kingdom since the vote to leave the EU was taken place. The single biggest vote of confidence came from the Japanese company SoftBank with that $24 billion investment in ARM. We've seen investment from companies like GlaxoSmithKline as well. This is a time to be confident about the British economy. The fundamentals of the British economy are very strong, and we want to encourage that investment to take place in the UK, and that is exactly what I and this government will be doing.
Pat McFadden.
The Secretary of State for leaving the European Union wrote in July on the Conservative Home website, and I quote, "I would expect the new Prime Minister on September the 9th to immediately trigger a large round of global trade deals with all our most favoured trade partners." So can I ask the Prime Minister, can she confirm that she will be able to trigger these deals in 2 days' time, on Friday, as predicted by her Secretary of State, and which countries will be involved?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, I have been involved in discussions with countries on free trade deals that we can develop. I was doing that at the weekend at the G20 summit with a number of countries. I listed some of them in my statement earlier. There were others too, and I'm pleased at the opportunities that we now have and the willingness that other countries have to sit down round the table and talk to us about trade deals.
Nigel Mills.
The Prime Minister agreed that for trade to be truly free and to work for everyone, it needs to be free of corruption. So could she update the House on the discussions on tackling corruption at the summit and taking forward the actions agreed at the London summit earlier this year? And perhaps explain how some of the countries at the summit who are a little less keen on taking action responded to that.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It is important that we deal with corruption if we're going to be able to see these free trade deals, people trading freely around the world. But also, it is, for some countries, it is sadly corruption that gets in the way of being able to develop their economies and of people in those countries being able to take the benefits that economic development can bring. The G20 was collectively clear that they wanted to continue the anti-corruption work that is being done. I myself made specific reference to the International Anti-Corruption Coordination Centre, which we are setting up here in London, and a number of countries are joining us in that. That's going to be one part of the action that we need to take, but I can assure my honourable friend that the G20 was very clear that we need to continue to press on the outcomes of the anti-corruption summit that we had here in London.
Nick Twigg.
Many people are not getting a share of globalisation, especially in this country. Could I ask the Prime Minister what specific measures she and her other leaders agreed at the G20 to deal with that problem of making sure that the benefits of globalisation are given out more equally?
Well, the honourable gentleman is right, and as I referred to in my statement, there was a collective agreement, echoing the comments that I made from the United Kingdom, that we need to ensure that the benefits of globalisation, the benefits of economic development, are truly shared among people. There's a number of steps that we need to do in order to ensure that. In some countries, as my honourable friend has just indicated, it is about dealing with corruption. There's a number of other areas. I referred earlier to the work we're going to be taking on corporate irresponsibility. That was actually picked up and echoed by a number of leaders around the G20 table, so our commitment remains absolutely strong.
Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the government announcing this week that it plans to ban plastic microbeads in many cosmetic products, including face scrubs and toothpastes. And I would request that, as well as the moral stance that this government takes at forums like the G20 on anti-slavery and on ensuring free markets, that we continue to be world leaders in environmental policies and forwarding those so that we can protect our marine wildlife and the rest of the planet.
And I thank my honourable friend for the comments he's made about the decision we've taken on microbeads. They clearly have an impact on marine life, and it's clearly right that we are banning those in certain products. But again, this is another area where the UK can be leading. We have seemed to be leading on issues like climate change, and I think this whole wider area of environmental concerns is one on which we can lead too.
Public services are exempt from all current EU negotiated trade deals which the UK is party to. Will she commit today to a public services exemption clause from all future post-Brexit UK trade deals, as her appointed Trade Secretary failed to do so in answer to a written question by myself?
I refer the honourable gentleman to the references I've made earlier to the sort of approach that we are taking, where we're not setting out at this stage the details of any particular negotiation that we are going to take part in relation to looking at trade deals. We will go out there and we will get the right deals for the United Kingdom.
Mr. David Rutley.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's very positive statement today. The UK, the North West, Cheshire, Manchester and Liverpool can rightly be proud of our clear strengths in science, with world-leading projects like the Square Kilometre Array at Jodrell Bank and more widely in life sciences. Can my right honourable friend confirm that these sectors will continue to be absolutely central to what the government does with the Northern Powerhouse and in taking forward its new industrial strategy, but also that they'll be central to these new trade deals that are so vital to the future of our economy.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it enables me actually to recall that I don't think I responded to one of the points made by the honourable member for Denton and Redditch earlier when he talked about the Northern Powerhouse. This government remains absolutely committed to the Northern Powerhouse and the development that we have seen in the sorts of, crucially, in new industries, in looking at new scientific development, such that my honourable friend has referred to, is and remains an important part of that. And I can assure him that as we look to these new trade deals, we will also be looking to the sort of developments that can take place, the sort of innovative decisions that we can take, which ensures that we're not just looking at trade in, if you like, traditional goods and services, but actually saying what more can we do, what can we develop for the future, and include those.
Emma Reynolds.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for clarifying that her Brexit Secretary was wrong to rule out membership of the European single market, that her Foreign Secretary was wrong to campaign for a points-based immigration system, and that her International Trade Secretary was wrong to say we are leaving the customs union. But isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that if we want to strike trade deals with non-EU countries, and I am somebody who appreciates the value of free trade deals, we will have to leave the customs union, and that will bring disadvantages for UK businesses and for foreign direct investment.
Well, I think when I say I'm not going to repeat what I've said earlier in relation to the stance we're taking on the negotiations, all I would do is actually encourage the Honourable Lady to take her leader to one side and point out to him the benefits of free trade, given what he's said in this chamber today.
Generic. Speaker, I'm delighted to hear the Prime Minister's obvious commitment to free trade. But actually, in many respects, free trade is on the retreat in the world today. Global levels of trade and investment are on the decline. We've seen in the United States a lack of support in Congress and from presidential candidates. And even here, misinformation and scaremongering from some quarters in recent years, leading to an erosion in faith in the benefits of free trade amongst even our own constituents. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that given the centrality of free trade and signing agreements to the future of our economy, now is the time to put aside that scaremongering, particularly, I'm afraid, in some parts of the left of British politics, and believe in free trade and its ability to work for everyone?
Well, my honourable friend has made an important point. It was significant that the G20 was very clear that we wanted to take action on protectionism. We didn't want to see a retreat into protectionism. But the point my honourable friend has made is a very valid one and was also discussed at the G20, which is the need for us all who support free trade to go out there and make the case for it and to show the benefits that free trade can bring. And because, as I've said earlier, and I think has been universally echoed on the Conservative benches, on the government benches, it is free trade that underpins our economic growth and underpins our prosperity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given, as we understand it, comments made by the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union on Monday at this dispatch box are to be regarded as personal opinion as opposed to government policy, and further considering that the remarks were made by the Secretary of State for International Trade in relation to the customs union required to be changed, if it is the case that the Prime Minister is to continually amend statements and comments made by her newly appointed ministers, can I ask the Prime Minister why she made those appointments in the first place?
Well, the Honourable Lady has referred to matters which have been referred to in previous questions. I have answered in previous questions, and I suggest she takes the answer that I've given before.
Mark Pawsey.
The Prime Minister's already referred to the very substantial recent investment by the Japanese firm SoftBank, and so I wonder if she could just give the House a little bit more about the reassurances she's able to give to overseas companies to enable them to continue to invest in the UK as a centre of excellence in manufacturing.
I'm very pleased to say that to encourage companies to invest in the United Kingdom. I think there are some real opportunities here in the UK. We are a centre of excellence in certain areas in terms of manufacturing. And I think, as I referred earlier to the visit I've made to Jaguar Land Rover, to see that investment coming into the United Kingdom to reinvigorate that company, to create jobs, to create growth, is a very good example of what can be done. And I want to see that happening across a wide range of industries, but also across the whole country.
Barbara Keeley.
Speaker, can I follow the question of my right honourable friend, the member for Exeter, on imported labour and people who come to work here? 10% of doctors in the NHS are EU nationals, and their position is now very uncertain. We know that since June the 23rd, doctors who are EU nationals have been put off applying to work here, and since then, of course, we've had the vicious attacks and the increase in hate crime that the Prime Minister referred to. We actually need more doctors in the NHS. We actually have many unfilled training places. What is she going to say to reassure those EU nationals working in the NHS that we value them, and the same to people who should be looking at coming to work here?
I'm pleased to say to the Honourable Lady that, of course, under this government we have more doctors working in the NHS. The number of doctors in the NHS has increased since we came into government. But what I will also say on the position of EU citizens is that I fully expect to be able to guarantee the status of EU citizens. While we are members of the EU, their status does not change. I fully expect and intend and want to be able to guarantee the status of those EU citizens. The circumstances in which that would not be possible would be if the status of British citizens living in other EU member states was not guaranteed.
Jackson.